So if we take a look at an anthropological perspective, and so as we apply it to social psychology, we've studied cultures throughout human history. We've kind of compared aspects of them. And so taking an anthropological look at human culture, we really can help us understand socially and get in the minds of people that are outside of our own. It is very difficult for folks in the United States, it's been my experience, for us to really kind of adopt a different mindset. A lot of us are not bilingual. Learning another language helps you with learning more abstract concepts, being able to possibly see other points of view. Let me kind of explain a little bit more in depth. So, if you think about human history before industrialization, before the agrarian economies came out of the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, those things. A lot of most times folks lived in hunter-gatherer societies. Well, how were social identities determined? Was it all about me? What I do? I'm going to go live by myself? Take care of myself? Be beholden to no one? Or was it, you know what? I need to go out and I need to gather wood, and I need to gather food, and I need to gather wheat, and I need to gather vegetables, and I need to gather fruit, I need to go out and hunt, I need to go out because of why? Because the group needs me. Because it's not just me. Because I know that if I get together with other people, we can farm more efficiently, or one person can be at home and make bread with this flour, can need this wheat in the flour, or this corn in the flour, and there's, think about how the roles were determined. Think about how interdependent people were upon each other before technology, and that's most of our existence. Also, consider this. Consider the degree of homogeneity, word for sameness, between generations and members of different generations. So say now, if I think about my grandparents, oh my goodness, their life was completely different. The way that they lived, the way that they lived on a farm, they lived kind of subsistently, had a dairy farm, milked cows, raised wheat, had diversified animals. Every once in a while they slaughter a pig to have food to eat, chickens for eggs. I'm thinking back to a couple of generations of my own family versus my kids, versus where they're real young, but and the society is not anything reflected. They're not going to be very similar, this homogeneity. Their lives are not going to be anything close to what my grandparents were. Most likely, I don't know, unless we nuked the whole thing and we got started over. Hopefully they survive. But seriously, thinking about this, we used to have a real sameness, a real similarity between the generations. If I was a farmer, if my dad was a farmer, I was a farmer. If my dad was a carpenter, I was a carpenter. And same thing about talking about female roles. Female roles were very very similar too. A granddaughter would have a very similar life to her mother's mother. In other words, there wasn't this big, what am I going to be? What am I going to do? There's so many options. But there also wasn't this individual that it's just all about me. It was interconnected. We do it because we have to do it together. Because if we do it by ourselves, we die. In India, they have a whole society. This has been their traditional understanding. It's in the past couple hundred years kind of dissolved. But this is, if you want to study Gandhi, this is what Gandhi really spoke out over and against, was the caste system. And in India, in Sanskrit, in the language, their classes were named after body parts. In other words, so the Brahmins were the elite, the leaders, the rulers, the upper crust. And Brahman is also refers to head. I haven't given this lecture in a while, so pardon my pronunciation if you know this. Kshatriyas, the kings, the arms, the warriors and the kings were the arms. Think about that. This is the warriors. Think about what arms were typically, and they even call nuclear warheads arms now. Words can tell us a lot, but that's the second class. They were referred to as the arms and the shoulders, Kshatriyas. All right, it's horrible pronunciation. Vaishyas were the thighs. This was the working. The midsection were the lawyers, the legs were the workers. Shudras were the feet. They're the servants. People did not break out of their caste systems. In other words, if you were born into this is where you served your entire life. There wasn't an upward mobility. There was no expectation of that. In fact, there's the Dalit. They're referred to as the untouchables. They weren't even part of the body. They're folks that work, in like picking up the sewer, picking up. Basically, they're considered unclean. And if a Dalit saw a Brahmin walking down the road, the Dalit's job was to duck down and get out of the way, because they didn't want to cause the uncleanliness. It'd be shameful for them to disregard their role. It was so ingrained into the understanding, into the language, that you knew that if you were a Vaishya, that's just who you were. That's who you're going to be. You will never be a Brahmin. So it's very alien for us to think about. It's extremely alien. But it was so ingrained in their mindset that their class was named after a body part. And what do you know about, though, I will say this, what happens if one part of the body tries to do the function of another? You're not very good at it. And so, think about trying to use your feet to write with. Or, okay, well, I'm now going to, I'm now going to try to fight with my stomach. That's how ingrained it was. It was accepted. And so there was no social mobility. One's birth determines one's status. One birth determines where you are. It really takes this sort of depth to understand a collectivist. I'm not saying all cultures did this, but they certainly did in India. But that's a collectivist understanding, is that I have a role, I serve it, I do it, because the whole body depends on me. You're welcome to read through this. Just some illustrations. I'm going to ask you some questions here. I want you to compare yourselves with your earlier generations. Self-esteem, it's an important concept. In an individualist culture, it stays relatively unchanged. It's a person's overall self-evaluation or sense of self. In a collectivist society, it changes according to context. So oldest child, identity threatened by capable younger sibling. That's probably a universal understanding. I think that in any type of culture that you're still going to have that. What levels of self-esteem are appropriate? Your esteem in a collectivist society would be primarily determined by how much you help others. In an individualist society, it'd be determined on how good you are about taking yourself. Bullying, look on page 53. Actually, high self-esteem goes along with, and high narcissism, there are higher levels of aggression. It's scary. You don't want to have somebody with, and generally people with high esteem are the bullies, not the people with the low esteem. They rate themselves as high in esteem. In narcissism, you see levels increasing in the U.S. I actually put this together in 2015, so it's definitely not going away. But again, has there been a culture in the history of humankind where a person has been able to say, I'm going to do my own thing? Typically no. Looking at industrialized versus non-industrialized countries, this is from 1975. Altruism is a trait which says, I'm going to behave in a way that may even be detrimental to myself to help someone else's life be better. That's an altruistic gesture. That's what altruism means. It means good for someone else, even at the expense of yourself. In non-industrialized countries, you see some relatively high numbers, percent of people scoring high in altruism. In Kenya, the number of people that they sampled, they were willing to sacrifice themselves, their own interests, for others' interests. When you move into industrialized nations, the altruism scores drop markedly. In Okinawa, in India, in the United States, 8%. 8% of folks displayed altruistic behaviors, looking out for someone else before themselves. Again, it's individualized. We are very individualized here. It's a selfless concern for the welfare of others that is expressed through pro-social acts such as sharing, cooperating, and helping. It's interesting. There was a study in 1991. Took a look at 2-year-olds. When they had a room full of playthings, they fought and they were not mean. They were not nice to each other. They weren't sharing. However, when they had a room full of maybe 1 or 2 toys, they shared. 2-year-olds are more likely to offer toys to appear when playthings are scarce rather than plentiful. 2-year-olds get it. We also have social comparisons. We evaluate our abilities and opinions by comparing ourselves with others. It can be positive. For example, with the depressive symptoms alleviate when we compare ourselves with others that have it worse. So it's actually shown depressive symptoms if you're saying, gosh, this happened, and man, look at that poor person over there. Actually, your depression lifts a little bit when you consider that. Negative, when we experience an increase in affluence, status, or achievement, we compare upward. This is kind of universal, at least in the United States. We don't always think, okay, now I've made it. I've got enough. I can live. I've got enough to eat. I've got plenty of money. I've got plenty of money in the bank. I've got plenty of material. I'm okay. People don't do that. This is what the research says, is when people achieve affluence, they tend to look up to the next level. What more can I do? What more can I get? What more can I get? In other words, there's an insatiable appetite that's created. Other important information. Self-efficacy. It's the belief in yourself to actually complete a task. It's different than self-esteem. Locus of control. Is this something that's externally controlled or something that I control inside myself? Is it something that I have no control over, or is it something that I can make, I can control? Learned helplessness is an important concept. You might look at this video, minute 2. Actually, there's something called the tyranny of choice, and we're in a consumer culture here where we have multiple choices for everything. So we can actually experience a decision paralysis, where if we're given like a choice of like 15 different bars of soap, brands of soap to choose from, we're going to take more time trying to decide, and we're going to be less satisfied with that choice after we make it. Same way with car buying, same way with house buying, same way with whatever it is. However, when you have fewer choices, and you make a choice, you have less buyer's remorse, less regret, and you make a decision quicker. That's on my slide. I thought this was important, so here's a bonus if you want to watch it. Take care.